Hey guys, this is Aram Zobian for pokercoaching.com. So this is my first video I'll be making for poker coaching and the first video I'm making in the content creating space. I've been thinking about getting into making content for some time now, and I'm finally making that step forward. What I will be discussing with you guys is how to run deep in large field tournaments. And just to introduce myself, I am 27 years old. I live in Las Vegas, and I've been playing poker for the last 8 years. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I really like what I do and the fact that I'm able to play a game for a living. I'm really big on performance and longevity. So one of my biggest goals is to be able to live to 100 years old, and I would also like to be able-bodied at 90. I don't want to be bedridden or in a wheelchair because I could have prevented it with my choices. So I spend a lot of time exercising and trying to keep my mind right, keep my body right by eating right. I go out into nature quite a bit. I do think it's a shame that, especially as poker players, we spend so much time behind screens. So I would encourage anyone to get out there, get in the ocean, get in the desert, wherever you may be. And I am mostly known in poker for my run in the 2018 World Series of Poker Main Event, where out of a field of 7,800 players, I was fortunate enough to get sixth for $1.8 million. And that's what the video is going to be on today and the next video or two, depending on how long the hands take. Take you through my journey in poker a little bit. I played a whole lot of live cash games before I played a single tournament. So I probably played like 2,500 hours, and I gained a lot of this deep stacked experience, just putting people to the test. I'm very aggressive by nature, so it was quite a steep learning curve where I was losing a lot of money and trial and error. I was not the guy to like slowly move up in stakes, but I've eventually figured it out and started winning. And then from there, I was always interested in the idea of tournaments, so I started playing some online tournaments and had some success there. And then I was able to play bigger, start playing some big live events like some World Poker Tours and the World Series of Poker. Nowadays, I'm playing the vast majority of tournaments, so I'll eventually play a cash game, but I really enjoy the grind of tournaments and the process of them. So I'll play up to 5Ks online, and live, I'll play down to like 400s, 600s, and occasionally play a 10K or a 25K, but my average buy-in live is probably around $2,500. And for a short period of time, I was working with solvers, mostly Pio Solver, and I had the privilege of learning from some top players when it comes to GTO and that whole side of the game. And it did help me. It was good to learn the basis of how to play, but it also took away from my game. Just to give my 2 cents on that, I think if you're playing the mid stakes, it's not nearly as important to learn how to use solvers and study with solvers as it is to just be confident in your game style and being present, being concentrated, not being on your phone at the table and trying your hardest, being intentional with your bet sizing. I think that's going to go a long way. Whereas with solvers, it's really only necessary if you're trying to reach the highest of stakes. So I just wanted to put that out there for anyone who feels intimidated or they feel that I really need to learn how to use the solver to take it to the next level. Not necessarily the case. They can be helpful, but they can also be very hard to learn and use, apply correctly. Just now getting into content creation and coaching, which I'm excited about. So what can you expect in today's video and videos to come? We're going to look at a big bluff, a single raise pot. We're going to explore the concepts of both reverse implied odds and implied odds. We're going to do an in-depth mathematical breakdown of a hand. When I say that, we're just going to do basic math. So it's it's not super in depth, but it is necessary to learn, in my opinion. We're going to look at a hand on the bubble that was a whole lot of fun, and we're going to look at a 4-bet pot. And in videos to come, so what should you expect from how I look at the game of No Limit Hold'em? Well, those two words, no limit, really define it to me. I really believe in using every available bet size. And like I said, I have a lot of deep stacked experience. So all that time that I played in those games so aggressively and playing when I was outside of my skill level, I learned some valuable things when it comes to putting people to the test. So I would be 3x pot shoving rivers or 5x pot shoving rivers, whatever it may be. And that's how I like to approach the game, is putting max pressure on people, trying to get the max amount of fold equity and the max amount of value based on the situation. So we're gonna discuss how to do exactly that, learning how to go for it and remove fear from your game, just trying to go for the best play based on the situation. We're going to discuss how we're going to pick up specific reads on opponents, whether it's sizing, whether it's timing. Perhaps I'll do a live play online video where we'll break down some plays just simply based on the timing that our opponents make. We'll talk about deviations. So, like I said, I have a decent baseline knowledge of the game. So let's just say this is how a spot operates. Well, instead we're gonna go over here and we're say this is how we ruin this guy's day because of X, Y, and Z. This is, based on what we saw earlier, whatever it may be. It's important to not just play by the book and try to get the most out of someone or get the most amount of folds out of someone. And lastly is just using a variety of different bet sizes. So I think at an early stage in your career, it's important to simplify your game and only use so many sizes. But as you get better and better, you want to open yourself up to the idea of using really small bets and really big bets based on the situation. So just to give you an example, let's say you're playing a cash game with a recreational and you notice this guy literally never folds to a flop bet and you have ace queen on queen 9-5. Well, instead of betting 75% pot, maybe you should bet 100% of the pot or even 150% of the pot. So just having a variety of different sizes available to you is going to immediately increase your win rate if you're applying that correctly. But without further ado, let's jump into some hands. So this is from day one of the main event. If you've never played this tournament, it's a 50,000 chip starting stack, and it has 2-hour levels. It's really, really special because you get to take your time and grind people down. You don't really have to force it. You might hear someone say, "Don't bluff it off on day one of the main event. You'll really regret it," something like that. Yeah. Folds to us on the button, and we have the King 7-0, super standard open. Just to discuss opening ranges, if you are confident in your play and you have 2 weak players, 2 unknown players in the blinds, and you're on the button, you should be opening 100% of hands because they're just not going to 3-bet you enough. They're not going to defend their big blind enough. And then when they do defend, they're not going to check raise you enough. They're not going to bluff you enough. So in pretty much every aspect, you're going to get played back at as little as possible. For the most part, I would say that most of the time, you might have an unknown player that's very aggressive, but for the most part, if you're playing, especially in America, people are passive. I go for a 2.5x size, which I think is the most appropriate. I see regs going for a 2x when they're 100 big blinds effective. I think that's a mistake. You want more money in the pot when you're in position. So big blind defends, and we get this low paired board with a hard card. And I go for a small bet. That should be the only size that's used because we're just targeting auto folds, and he has so many hands that are air that just missed, Queen 9-0 and 10-8 of hearts and King 3 of hearts, so on and so forth. and we get check raised to a really small size. And we have two options here. We can either continue by calling, or we can 3-bet on the flop. To talk about his check raises, he should be taking his best Jack X. So his Ace Jack, his King Jack, Queen Jack can check raise. Once he gets down to, like, say Jack 8, it's getting kind of dicey, so he's going to want to mostly check call. And then, of course, trips, he's going to want to check raise pretty much all his 4X, with the exception of maybe a hand like Ace of Clubs 4. That's just, blocking a lot of my continues, and it's just such a strong hand. And then some bluffs, he's going to use the low club draws. So a hand like Deuce 3 of clubs, 5 3 of clubs. All these low combinations of flush draws are really good because they don't have showdown value. He just gets to knock me out of the pot, and he also has equity when I continue. And then there are some non-intuitive hands, which are, the 3 to a straight and 3 to a flush. So Ace of Clubs 5, Ace of Clubs 3, 5 of Clubs 3, 6 5 of the club, 7 5 of the club, 7 6 of the club. And then even like a high card with clubs, so like King of Clubs 5 could do it, and like I said, pretty much any Ace of Clubs you could do it with, because then if you pick up a club on the turn, you can continue barreling and you're blocking folds. So I decided in game just to call, and we get the best turn we could possibly get, and our opponent goes for around a 40% pot size. And I start thinking to myself, well, how would I play my range on the turn? If I had a full house, or if I had a flush, how would I want to play it? Well, the SPR is not that deep heading to the river. If I call, it's only about 3. So it's going to be fairly easy to get stacks in, especially if he keeps betting. So I don't think raising with my range makes a lot of sense, and I don't think it makes sense with this hand either. If I was to raise, and then let's say he had a hand like 5-4, and then he came over the top and shoved on me, it would be a shame to fold the King of Clubs. I could see a raise with like some type of weak club being good. So if we floated the flop with 6-5 with a club and then raised the turn, because we don't really care if we get pushed off our equity there, that would be good. But I think we want to just call here. And then the other side of that is, if I have pocket jacks, pocket aces, a flush, I would want to just call and let him keep bluffing, and then, be able to evaluate on the river. Maybe the river double pairs the board and we have a flush, and he bets really big, and then we just fold. So I think we want to just play a call with most of our hands. Then we get the Queen of Hearts on the river. And once again, he goes for about this 40% size. So I don't think he has a super strong hand anymore. On the flop and the turn, I don't necessarily have any reason to think this guy doesn't have trips or this guy doesn't have a flush. But once he goes this size on the river, now I'm saying, well, if you had a 4, if you had maybe King 10 with a club for straight, if you had a flush, I think you're going to bet more around 7 or 8K at least, if not betting like 10K. So I think this is going to be more of like an ace, some random bluff. It might be a jack. It might sound crazy to think he's betting a jack with this line, but when you're playing a tournament like the main event, you might be playing with someone who plays twice a year, so they don't have really much rhyme or reason to be betting. They just, maybe he has a jack and he doesn't want to check the river and face a bet, for instance. So with all that being said, I think he's fairly capped. I have the King of Clubs. I can't win by calling, and I'm blocking a lot of strong hands. So we got a fairly easy shove here. And he ended up tanking for about 2-3 minutes, and he let it go, folded an ace. And of course, we had to show him. It was the end of the day, so weren't too worried about him paying us back with that information later. But this is actually my favorite hand from the entire tournament, believe it or not, all 9 days that I played, because I didn't really consider myself to be a great player at the time. So I struggled a lot with getting the desired result. A lot of my bluffs were inefficient because I was either making a sizing error or my line didn't make sense, whatever it may be. So momentum and confidence is really important in tournaments. So just getting this one through and ended up bagging around 175K to end day one. So 3.5x starting. From there, I never really looked back, but yeah, early momentum, very important. Go on to the next hand. This is from day two, once again at the end of the day. So same kind of thing where I was, I guess, so the hand prior, I was playing with that player all day. And then the player in question here, I was also playing with him all day. It was a younger gentleman, and he was pretty aggressive. He raises from under the gun one, and I'm in the cutoff with the ace king O, and I decide to go for a 3-bet. I have two options. I could, of course, 3-bet here, which has the merit of knocking the blinds out and the players behind out of the pot, and I get to play in position with a strong hand against an aggressive opponent. I could also just flat with the hopes of people squeezing behind, and then I disguise my hand. If it comes ace high, perhaps he will be betting into me 3 times, and we'll just be calling him down. But I went with the aggressive option here, and he ends up peeling. So the flop is 10-9 deuce rainbow. And I don't think this is especially good for in position. We do have the overpair advantage. So we're going to have aces and kings when he never does, and we're also going to have jacks and queens at some frequency. But we don't really have sets ever. So I'm never 3-betting pocket twos, and even 9s and 10s. So in a tournament as long and as good as the main event, like I said earlier, you can really take your time and pick your spot. So let's just say I 3-bet 9s for value, and the guy 4-bet me. Well, I'm going to have to peel and play a pot, and now all of a sudden we're playing a 4-bet pot with 9s. So the same thing with 10s. We're not really going to be 3-betting that often. So he has the nut advantage by having more stronger hands in the sets. But we still are doing fine on this board. We're still going to have a hand like ace-9 suited. We're going to have ace-10-0, king-10 suited, queen-10 suited, hands like that. So I can either small bet or check, and I went with a small bet, and our opponent decides to call. So just to talk about reverse implied odds, let's just say he check raised us. I would just let my hand go. I think it would be pretty disastrous, if we get the king turn or the ace turn and then he keeps on betting big. Well, it's pretty likely that we're just dead. He could have queen jack as a bluff on the flop, and then we turn a king, and then we make top pair. He makes a straight. He could just have a set. We're drawing stone dead. And yeah, I just think more bad comes than good. So it's just important to let this hand go if we do get check raised. Turn is the ace of clubs. So now we're feeling really good about our hand, considering we faded the check raise on the flop, and he checks to us. And I think our size here, it should be big. We're not going to really be betting small ever. If I had a hand like pocket tens or aces, that's when I would bet small as an exploit, because I would just expect him to be folding too much of his range. But considering our range here on the turn, well, if I have a hand like kings or queens, I'm not going to really want to bet for protection or, just be betting in general for value, because now it just seems too thin. I think he's just going to fold a 10 and he's going to continue a hand better than kings. So we would check a hand like, kings, queens, queen 10 suited, king 10 suited. So when we bet the turn, we're going to go for a large size because we're saying we have an ace or better, essentially. So whenever you're considering your bet size, you want to think about, well, what hands am I betting? If I get to bet a lot of my range, then I get to go for a small size or a large size. But if I'm only betting like really good hands, that means I'm polar. So that means I'm going to go for larger sizes. And so he ends up calling. And we got a super brick on the river. And we only have about 2/3 pot to play for on the river. So we just have a super easy shove. It's really hard to be beat here. There's only one combination of ace-4 suited and ace-4 hearts. If he had tens, nines, or deuces, he's going to check raise the flop at a high frequency. And if not, he's going to check raise the turn at some frequency. So those hands are super discounted. Really, the only way would be is, if he did still play a set, or if he turned aces and nines or aces and twos and aces and tens, and he's just letting me barrel off. But considering I cover the guy, and even if if I run into it, I'm still in the tournament, I just have easy shove for value, and he pretty much snap calls with ace jack, which I don't think is like a mistake. Once you get here, it's kind of tough to fold top pair, right? You're playing against someone who's capable of bluffs, and you get the best turn that you can possibly get. But his problem was his flop kill. So, like, for the same reason that I would fold to the check raise with my ace king, because I'm fearful of running into a strong hand when I turn an ace or a king. Well, he just turned the best possible turn he could get, and he was dead, right? And I just get to value bet him down to the river, and he has to call. So he should just let it go on the flop. Even if he turns a jack, what if I have king queen? What if I have jack 10 suited? What if I have overpairs that he's behind? If he turns an ace, I could have had aces, ace king, ace 10, etc. So really important to just let this go on the flop and not let your mistakes compound. Unfortunately, it costed him here for his whole tournament. All right, moving ahead to day 3. So now we're about 1,050 players remaining, and right around 1,000 are paid. So, with so many players left and only 50 needing to drop, you could think that we're going to be inside of the money very shortly, which is an important consideration in this hand. Under the gun, 1 raises to 13K, 2.6x, and I peel the cutoff with 6s. And I guess I should mention he was a recreational player. And so my decision point is fairly simple. I don't want to 3-bet this hand ever. I just want to keep it simple and play in position, try to make a set, or, maybe get some low board where I can bet if check to and try to take it down. Now it folds to the big blind, who has around 40 big blinds. And this is Ryan LaPlante. I didn't know him at the time, but he's a fairly well-known pro, and he's also fairly aggressive. And he decides to slide out 65K. So considering that we're essentially on the money bubble, and considering his large size and given the situation, what do you guys think Ryan's range is in the spot? And if you want to take a guess, then you can pause the video and think it over for a few seconds. So Ryan's range in this exact spot is going to be aces, kings, and a bluff, and nothing else. Because if he had a hand like queens or ace king, he's for sure just going to want to 3-bet all in. If he has ace king, he doesn't want to squeeze. Even if he has ace king suited, he doesn't want to squeeze and then get peeled and then break out. SPR is going to be super low. If it comes 10-8-5, he's just going to be unsure as to what to do. Same thing with queens. If he was to squeeze queens and get an ace or king high flop, it's going to be really tricky proceeding, with a low SPR, and you're out of position and you're right about to make money, right? So you wouldn't want to be in either of those scenarios. So you would just want to end the hand and go all in pre-flop. So that being said, I think I have a really good spot to back shove on him because his range is really narrow. So when someone's range is really narrow, that opens them up to having way, way too many bluffs. So I'm going to explain this from 2 sides. One is the mathematical side, and the second is the human side. So let's first take a look at the math. The question becomes, how often does our back shove need to work in order to be good? Since we're risking, a large portion of our stack, and we're risking, 182 to win less, to win 103, we only have 20% equity to win the pot when we do get called, then we better be right a lot of the time. So I've prepared 3 scenarios. We're going to talk a little bit about combinations. So the first scenario is if Ryan was being balanced, if Ryan was being careful, and he said, you know what, if I squeeze here and either player decides to be aggressive and thinks I'm full of it, then I'm going to lose a lot of my chips. So you know what, I'm going to use aces and kings for value. That's 12 combinations because the pairs are 6 combinations each. And then he says, I'm going to use ace 5 suited, and that's going to be my single bluff. So suited hand, there's 4 combinations there. So we have a 3-to-1 ratio now of value to bluffs, right? So 25% of the time we win the full pot, which is 103,000. But 75% of the time, we're only going to have 20% equity. So in that situation, we lose 80,000 chips. And so if you take those two numbers, 103,000 that we win 25% of the time, and then we're losing 101,000 75% of the time, that results in a net loss of 10 big blinds on average. So of course we're going to want to avoid that situation. If we're doing it way too much, then it's not going to be good for us. By back shoving, I mean. So scenario B is versus old man coffee. The tight guy who literally never has a bluff. So of course we're going to want to avoid this, right? So very easy math here. We're losing a ton. We're losing 20 big blinds. But this goes not only for this spot, but many spots. So let's say you have a really good bluff catcher on the river, but the guy that is betting into you never bluffs. Well, it might be as good as having 2 napkins, right? It doesn't matter how good your blockers are or how good your bluff catcher is if your hand is a bluff catcher and the guy never bluffs. So same thing here, right? If he only has aces or kings, we better let our hand go. Now moving on to scenario C, which I think is the most likely scenario. And let me explain why. So scenario C, our guy's really, really out of line. So here's just a couple of pictures. It's the same thing. Just wanted to show you a little bit about combinations. So here's his value range. He has his aces and kings, right? Now we added in some bluffs. So we have 4 combinations of some of these suited aces. We have a couple combinations of this king 9 suited. And then what you'll see here at the bottom, this is the combinations of the offsuit hands. So like I said, with offsuit hands, there's 12 combinations, and this is ace jack that's highlighted. And so why is this important? So if there's only 6 combinations of pairs, which is his value, and there's twice as many with his bluffs, which is offsuit hands like ace 9, ace 10, king jack, ace queen, it becomes extremely apparent how easy it is for this guy to just overdo it. Because when it folds to a human being in the spot and he looks down at ace jack, then who's to say he doesn't squeeze every time because it looks strong, right? We want to win the pot. Like, we're on the bubble of the main event, and we make it 65K. There's no way these guys aren't going to give me credit, right? Well, not necessarily true, right? Because if in our shoes, if we see how narrow his range is, then we start thinking about his bluffs. Okay, what if he's squeezing king 7 suited? What if he's squeezing ace 6 suited, ace 2 suited? Any of these hands, his value range is just so small, and his bluff range can be so wide that it becomes more and more problematic the more aggressive the player is. All right, so that's the math side of things, and let's just talk about his size and his timing. So I know you guys weren't there, but the manner in which he did it, he took maybe 15 or 20 seconds and just casually slid out 65K, and I just completely was not buying it. Like, I just don't think if you have aces, you're gonna go 65K. Maybe kings. Kings makes more sense because, of course, any ace-side flop is bad for you, and with kings, it's way different than aces. So that makes sense. But even then, I just think he's going to go something like 53K or 47K, 50K, something like that. So returning to the combinations, Now on the second picture, this is the 6 combinations of his aces. Well, look at what we've done here. We're now taking away 4 of his combinations of aces based on his sizing. So I just don't buy it, right? So I'm taking away 4 combos of his aces. He's down to 8 combos of value. And I say, you know what? Now I'm going to take a couple combinations of kings away as well because, again, I just don't think you have it. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with him having 6 combinations of value and 45 combinations of bluffs. So you can't see it here. This is just what I came up with. It's a hypothetical scenario, of course, but this is just one scenario. It could be 30 combinations of bluffs and he'd still be way overdoing it. It could be 50 or 60 or maybe 70 combinations if he's squeezing like all these offsuit aces and suited aces and other hands that I mentioned. But in this exact scenario of him having 6 to 45, well, now we're making 17 big blinds, and that is amazing, right? So in game, we, thankfully we back shoved and he folded. He showed a 3. He ended up having ace through suited, and it's a great result. But if we do run into it, considering everything, we shouldn't feel bad about seeing kings, because we just have to go with our read. And I don't think that. I just want to mention that I wasn't counting combinations in game. I wasn't saying, oh, he only has 8 combinations of bluffs or 6 combinations and he has like 50. I just didn't think he had it. But I just wanted to show you guys the math side of things, because it goes to show that if we're playing against someone we know is balanced, we have to be careful. But whenever you're in a scenario with someone, let's say you're playing with some European guy or some really aggressive Spaniard who are squeezing every hand. You're calling an open and then this guy just squeezes every time behind. Well, it can become a really good spot to back shove on them, because if they're getting really out of line, they're seeing you not playing back at them, or they're seeing the whole table is pretty passive, then at some point you have to make a stand against certain players, and it can end up being really, really good. So if you want to ignore all the math, it's completely fine. Just have confidence in, is this guy getting out of line? Do I think this guy doesn't have it? Because, you can just back raise on him or start 4-betting him, start 3-betting him more when he's opening a lot. So the last consideration is, what if you want 47 or 50K? I would have just mucked, even if I think he's getting out of line too much, like his sizing, if he went 50K, it's just so much more indicative of a really strong hand than of a bluff heavy range. So at that point, I would just let it go. But just the specifics, he kind of, gives it away, then we're going to go for it. All right, moving on. This is a few hands later. We're inside the next level now, and we're maybe 20, 25 players off. And low jack raises some really aggressive French guy. And we have the dream. We have the aces on the button. And we go 43K, which is fairly large. Normally, I'd probably go 39K. 40K. I guess it's not that large, but I just wanted to size up just a little bit to give the guy the idea that I was bluffing. And he had been playing with me. He knew I was aggressive. And since we're on the bubble, I expected him to play back at me quite a bit. And this is exactly what happens. He comes in for 4-bet of 125K, which is pretty large. And now we have this dilemma. It's a good dilemma nonetheless, but at the time I was thinking, should I shove and maybe stack a hand like queens, make sure I stack like ace king, or double up, I guess, because he covers me. But on the other side of the coin is his bluffs. Like if he's bluffing, then we really would want him to blast off to us. And considering we just talked about combinations for so long, this is another spot where it's really, really, really easy to get out of line. So I thought the best play is for sure just to call. And, if we do end up getting out flopped, or if he has like pocket kings and we get a king high flop, well, we're just going to have to give him the money. So he comes in for a small c bet, which I think is good. There's no reason to really bet large in this scenario. And once again, I don't want him to fold out his hands if he's bluffing. So I just want to call. And turn is a 10, and he just puts this all in. And if we're beat, we're beat. We're gonna have to bubble the main event if we have to, and that's gonna suck after 3 full days of playing. But it is what it is, and we end up calling. And the guy is 6-4-0. So thankfully, we faded the 10% heading to the river. But again, to talk about a spot where it's really easy to overdo it, this guy's putting max pressure on us on the bubble. When in actuality, I'm not really going to 3-bet him as a bluff too much, just as an adjustment I'm going to make, because I'm aware that he's aggressive. He's aware that that I'm aggressive. So, even if I had I think if I had a hand like queens here or ace queen, pocket jacks, pocket tens, I might flat every single time just to try to play a smaller pot, because, let's say we had queens in this exact spot. Well, I think we're probably going to end up folding the turn. It's just a little too dicey. So I think flatting those hands makes sense, and playing a very value-heavy approach. So 3-betting maybe like ace-king suited, kings and aces, and then some bluffs on this spot makes sense, considering the bubble and considering the guys just playing back at us with 6-4-0. So yeah, just don't do this. You just have so many better hands. You can use a suited ace, you can use a suited king, or at least 2 high cards. When you have a 6 and a 4, you're like, what are you trying to do? You're not blocking me from having any value. You have really poor playability post flop. So it was just completely out of line, and thankfully that propelled us forward. All right, so now we are jumping ahead once again to day 5. I didn't have really too many interesting hands on day 4, and it was so long ago. It was 4 years ago, so I didn't want to mess up any details. But anyways, so you might notice we're 10-handed in this replayer, whereas in the other hands it wasn't like that. And the reason that I have it 10-handed is I make this peel with 3s. And I just want to state the fact that, in theory, this is clearly a mistake, because for a couple of reasons. So if players are playing correctly behind, they're going to be squeezing most of their range. So let's say the low jack has king 10 suited, pocket jacks, or ace queen o. He should squeeze most of the time. But what happens in these live tournaments is people just call. So I get to see the flop for cheaper on average, and I also get to realize my equity more. So just like in that first hand where I was saying, you should raise every hand on the button because you're not going to get played back at enough. Well, you get to peel hands that you really shouldn't. I would also peel pocket 2s and ace 2 suited and ace 5 suited, and in the hopes of making a really strong hand and winning a big pot because we're so deep. So everyone folds around to the big blind and calls. We end up flopping bottom set on a board that hits the opener white hard. A lot of his offsuit stuff like ace queen o and king queen o connects, and then he's going to have, of course, over pairs and 10x and club draws, king jack, ace king, ace jack, etc. Checks to him, and he bets around the third pot. And now I have to decide between a call and a raise. And I think a raise is by far the superior play. You would just hate to flat here. And, maybe you hope the big blind comes along, or maybe you hope that he raises. It's just not going to happen enough. And there's so many turns that just kill the action. Let's just say he had kings and the turns the ace of clubs, or the turns any club. Well, now we're going to win a way smaller pot when maybe we would just win it all if we raised right away. So it's really important to fast play in this scenario. And also it's some hidden benefit of that when we raise here, the big blind has to play really tight. So we don't mind him folding the king 5 of clubs. We don't mind him folding Jack 9 or King 9 with a club or King Jack, because he's only going to really put more money in the pot when he improves to a hand that beats us, with the exception of him maybe making a pair and giving us some money. But anyways, he ends up calling, and then we get a super clean turn, and we go for around 60% on the turn. Just going to want to try to play for stacks. Don't want to bet too small. If he does have a fairly weak hand and he would have called a small bet and folded to a large bet, then so be it. We're just going to try to stack the top of his range here and not give him a good price. If he does have a good draw, like the nut flush draw or some type of combo draw, and he comes over the top, and we have a super easy call. Once again, if he has queens or tens somehow, then we're just going to give him money. And he ends up having king queen, and we have 100% equity heading into the river, which is the absolute dream for this size of a pot. So I just want to talk a little bit about his decision points with his exact hand. And I don't think it's necessarily a mistake to be betting on the flop. But that being said, I don't think he should just auto c-bet his hand, because he's not going to really be able to get through streets of value from either player all the time. Like I mentioned earlier, there's just certain turns that kill the action on the turn or slow him down. It could be an ace or a club or maybe a 10, and he's worried about someone making trips. So he could start with a check and just check to call and keep this pot smaller, maybe hope that I'm bluffing. And if it does check through, he's still going to be able to value bet. If the turn is a blank and checks to him, he can be fairly confident he has the best hand the vast majority of the time. So again, it's not necessarily a mistake. It's just it's a good consideration to just check here. And then the second thing, which is an even larger mistake, is he decides to check jam the turn with just good top pair, when in reality, I can't name a hand that I'm bet calling that's worse than his. If I had queen jack, I'm not going to raise the flop and then bet the turn. That would be way too thin. The absolute weakest hand I would do this with is ace queen, and even then I wouldn't do that at full frequency. So I guess what he was hoping for is I had some type of draw and he's denying equity, but I think it's a really big mistake when you're shoving a hand for value that can't get called by worse. And I mean, it's really unlikely that I have a draw anyways, because let's say I have king jack of clubs and then I raise the flop and then I get this brick turn. I'm probably just going to check the turn. I don't want to get jammed on like he did and have to call it off or have to fold with so much equity. So I think this is a pretty big error on his part. And I remember just the ace coming on the river, and I immediately thought of that. I was like, if he check called, then he probably would have just gotten away from it on the river. So try to make sure to not make the easy decision by shoving and ending the hand when you can't really get called by worse. All right, heading over to another hand. We have ace king here. This is against the same opponent. This was just earlier on in the day, and he raises the cutoff to 2.25x, and we're super deep, as we can see. We're 110 bigs deep. Folds me in the big blind, and I go for 3-bet to around 8.5 bigs. I do think this is small. I definitely would like to see something closer to 210, 220K. And then an adjustment you could make is slightly size down with really strong hands. So if you have ace king suited or pocket aces or kings and you really wanted them to peel, then sure, you could go 200K. But in general, you should go around 5x here. We're really deep, out of position versus someone who can peel us. He's in the cutoff. You could just have jack 9 suited and peel us, or 8-7 suited or something like that. Anyways, he comes over the top with this 4-bet all of a sudden, and the alarm bells are really ringing off. So I don't know this player. So whenever an unknown 4-bets you, Unless you know they're really aggressive, they're one of these rare breed of players that really gets after it. I think this is going to be aces and kings and like maybe ace king suited the vast majority of the time, and then some queens, and then a bluff once in a while. So ace king is in pretty rough shape considering his really strong range. Nowadays, with all my experience now, I think I would just pitch this hand. I would just let it go and move on because I might just flop a king and he has aces. I might just uh, flop a king and he has pocket kings. So I'm going to end up getting in trouble out of position here a decent amount of the time. So yeah, and then when it comes to the five betting, probably only want to five bet aces to be honest. Getting in ace king here for 110 bigs is really out of the question. The only scenario I think that could be okay is if you have a really aggressive dynamic with someone. So let's just say someone's been three betting you all day and you've been four betting them, and then they've even been five betting you, and then they show you a bluff. If you're a really aggressive player and you have a really aggressive dynamic with someone, this is a spot. Okay, we're going to shove on him, and maybe he folds, or maybe he's just four betting to call ace king and he has the same hand. Maybe he has queens and he's hoping we shove over the top with like ace five suited. But as is, yeah, I would never get in this hand against an unknown. I think it's a really, really big error because you're just going to see aces and kings almost always. Anyways, I decide to peel, and we get a brick flop, check, check, and the turn is a nine of diamonds. I do have the ace of diamonds, and I was thinking about doing something in game here, maybe like betting the turn and then shoving on like diamond river, but I just decided to check, and he bets something like 40%. I have an easy fold, of course, and he ends up showing aces. So our opponent was gracious enough to show us the goods, and super happy that I didn't flop a piece like an ace or king after seeing his hand, of course. And I was also happy that I didn't decide to make that stab on the turn because it would not have worked out for me. But yeah, just to reiterate, I mean, of course he has aces. Some unknown guy just four betting us day 5 of the main event. I think that's going to wrap it up for today and in terms of the hands. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that it's going to be applicable for you guys to use some of these concepts in game. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, or any comments, then I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much for spending the time to watch this video. Cheers.